Well, it means a completely different thing to be Middle Eastern in our post 9/11 era. It meant a completely different thing before that. But I'm very interested in pan-Middle Eastern identity, and I think that after 9/11, rather than even thinking of myself as an Iranian, I began to think of myself as a Middle Eastern person more than ever. And it is very loaded and it's very mixed. But probably when I was growing up, I felt a little bit ashamed. I was born the year before the Iran hostage crisis, and I was always taught that we were Persian, not Iranian. I had one of those families where they said, "Oh, say Persian," and then I even for a while said Iranian. I remember growing up as a teenager, I knew Americans were saying Iranian, so I was Iranian. And then after 9/11, it sort of forced me to confront who I was and what that meant. And the ultimate outcome was pride, so it's a happy ending. Part of it is politics and world affairs. Generally, I think when you feel somewhat marginalized and you become the new minority, you tend to gravitate towards your heritage, I think, more. So that's been happening to me. I think naturally as you get older, you go back to your roots too, for the most part. But the novel had a lot to do with that. The novel, for many years, it felt like I had forgotten what it was to be Iranian. And, when I was in New York, I was a New Yorker. When I was in California, I was a Valley girl. And so it brought me back full circle because I was constantly immersed in issues, whether in the writing of it or even in the press phase. It's interesting to be from a place that's dominated so much of world news in the last 30 years particularly. I think that, a lot of people joked with me when my novel came out that, isn't it great that Iran is hot right now? Iran wasn't particularly hot when I wrote the novel. There wasn't much talk about Iran immediately after 9/11 when I started the book. But Iran has never stopped being in the news, I think, particularly since 1979 or the advent of the Islamic Revolution. So I think for a lot of Iranians, exiles, in this country, there's always been a sense of unease with who we are. And we've often felt that we have to somehow explain to people who we are and what it means. I mean, there's tons of misunderstandings, and I get questions all the time. What's Persia versus what's Iran or something like that, and so there's always a lot of explaining to do. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is you're from this ancient culture, so much history, so much turmoil. And so much grandeur. It seems hard, I think, for young people, particularly in this age, to know what to do with all that. At least for me, for sure. And then when religion comes into play, it's also very tricky. I was raised without religion being a big part of my background. Historically, we were Muslim, but my father made the decision to informally convert to Zoroastrianism. I mean, my name is foreign to Iranians as well. Porochista is the daughter of Zarathustra. So I didn't quite even fit in with other Iranians, and certainly not Iranians in Los Angeles. The whole Tehrangeles phenomenon was very foreign to me because we grew up in a modest suburb in Southern California where we were one of the only Iranian families, maybe the only for a while. So it's been very mixed, I think, and continues to be. And, how much I speak about it and what I feel about it often is dictated by my own reaction with things I read. I'm sort of separated from Iran too. I don't have a lot of relatives there. My father just went there for the first time in 30 years last week. But there definitely is a sense of unease and eggshells, walking on eggshells always with the country that you're from, which I think few people feel. No, since 1981, 80, I have not been back, and I don't have immediate plans to. In the 90s, I definitely planned on going to Iran at some point, and for whatever reason, it didn't happen. But it seemed like the climate was perfectly fine for an Iran visit. In recent years, obviously, since Ahmadinejad has come to power, it seems like less and less of a good idea. But like I said, my father went there last week and he had a wonderful time. And he did have trouble at customs and all that. But when he was actually there, he had a wonderful, wonderful time. But I think it might be a little bit different for women, and particularly women who've gotten any sort of Western press or have any sort of prominent Western identity. So I'm going to hold off on that for a second.